Everybody, welcome to the long-term planning community virtual Zoom event. We held one in person on Saturday at the middle school. We thank everyone for coming. I wanted to introduce, we have our board president here, Daphne Kendall. We have long-term planning co-chairs, Beth Barron and Susan Cantor, and board members, Deborah Bronfeld and Mara Franceschi are with us. We have our longtime planner, Mike Zuba, along with us, and Dan Chatone from Freytag, Bees, Hopkins, and Duthie along with us. We're going to start out. This has been, a lot of planning over the last 4 years plus. We're going to go over the planning presentation. Mike Zuba is going to go over that we went over at the December 12th board meeting. We're going to go over it very briefly. I wanted to start out by just showing the audience where they can find information about planning real quick. Just bear with me. So if you go to the homepage of our school district, Princeton Public Schools, you can see right here, if you go to district, planning our school's future, and you click on there, will be all sorts of information here. The summary slide deck that I just mentioned that Mike Zub will be going over with. And tomorrow we should have the slide deck that FVHD will be going over with tonight, talking about some of the plans that we're looking at. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to kick it off to Mike Zuba.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to just share my screen to walk us through this deck. And as Matt mentioned, I know we've presented this a couple times. I'm going to touch on a lot of the highlights to it and leave a lot of room for Dan to be able to go through the architectural component of it. So hopefully everybody could see my screen. What started this process? I know I've been involved since late 2019. This process started way back in the fall of that year, and we did some workshops and we were getting into the master planning component, and unfortunately took a little bit of a pause there with COVID, and then came back and made some recommendations to the board after working with the internal working group in 2020 and 2021. That presentation was done in the springtime. But a lot of the same drivers that were in play before the pandemic and before we had the pause and then the restart are still in play today. The community is growing. There's 1,100 new residential units that are in the pipeline, I'll call it. There's still needs in the community, especially at the various schools, in order to bring those up to capacity levels and then make some improvements in there. So some of those same issues that were at play back then are still in play today. Back in the springtime of 2023, the board restarted the process. Our charge as the long-term planning, as well as my charge as the planner, was to be able to look for solutions, be able to kind of draw our focus on the elementary and middle school capacity, and to really kind of take a deeper dive, building off of the prior work, and also looking at some additional options and new options that we may not have covered as part of that past work. Anytime you begin a master planning process, you always want to be able to have a framework for the master plan and the planning. So working with our group, we created these master planning, these major considerations, at the top. And, this isn't in an order of importance, but these are the four main planning considerations: was to have a value-based plan that really supported the educational mission and vision of Princeton Public Schools, be able to have facilities that reflect the quality of the education there. When you're going through a process that's going to require construction, going to require budgetary changes, both from the capital side as well as the operation, you always want to be mindful of taxpayer affordability. That was one of the key components as we went through the options to really kind of begin weighing those. We know in many of the communities across New Jersey, especially Princeton, taxes are high. In order to be able to pass a project, you have to have a successful referendum. We also know that every year going through the budget process, you need to be able to support your system and have financial sustainability. So as we were working our way through these options, we realized that it's not just that one-time capital expense of school construction, but what is it going to mean for those annual operating budgets? Is there a way to be able to have better efficiencies? Is there ways to be able to have some cost control? And then last but not least, it is really looking at the students and families that are members of our school community, being able to minimize that disruption overall, minimize the disruption for staff, minimize the disruption for the entire Princeton school community. The planning parameters are really looking to be able to support those considerations. So we're looking at accommodating that future growth. We've been talking about both the enrollment for a number of years now at the elementary schools, the enrollment at the middle and high school, tracking that, running enrollment projections, understanding where our space needs are, utilizing the capacity in those buildings. We want to be able to develop a financially prudent construction program, as I mentioned, having sustainable operations, and also looking at what makes sense from a transportation standpoint. One thing that we've learned over the last 3 years is that transportation costs are on the rise, as all operational costs are. So we want to be able to look at it from that lens of reducing travel times, as well as being able to provide a greater level of walkability, which also has a little bit greater level of sustainability. Maintaining the overall DLI program at a minimum of 2 sections per grade, and then also having that 2 sections of traditional track, because as the last several years of operations at CP, we begin to lose that traditional track. So students that were part of that neighborhood and part of that school community, if they did not want to be part of DLI, they were seeking a more traditional track elsewhere, which then removed them from that part of the community, but also increased transportation overall. And then really align the capacity overall for the foreseeable future. And that's going to be done through 2 real big levers there. The first is going to be redistricting, which I'll touch on in a little bit. And the second is going to be able to take a look at the DLI policy and craft a policy that's going to reflect the programming in that building. So these aren't necessary scenarios, but we looked at different approaches. And then within each of these approaches, we explored various scenarios. Some of these approaches that we've revisited as part of the work that we did over the spring, summer, and fall were approaches that were discussed back in 2019, 2020, 21, being the sister school. We also talked about the 5-6 model, but then we brought in this new approach, which was the dual track school. And anytime you're planning, you also want to be able to understand that there's an impact to all of our planning parameters and planning considerations if you were to do nothing. So we really wanted to be able to take a deep dive and be able to weigh these options equally against each other. So we evaluated them through a series of different lenses as we worked our way through the options. And when you think about master planning, if you followed along with us back in the springtime or the summer, we were very high level. Say we were at 10, 15,000 feet. We weren't looking at conceptual building plans. We weren't looking at adjacencies and how buildings would lay out. We were very, very high level. As we'll see tonight, we're getting more and more narrowed and more focused. We looked at educational impacts. We looked at operational costs. We looked at construction costs, enrollment balancing, community disruption, and walkability, to ultimately get to a family or an approach that fit best in that area. For those that were with us in the fall, in October, we had looked at Community Park having a 5-section per grade model that included having 2 sections of DLI with 3 sections of a traditional track as part of the planning process, and really as part of input that we've received along the way, not only from the community, from the school community, from the educators, from our architectural team. We began to kind of refocus that. So rather than having that 5-section per grade model, we went with a 4-section per grade model, which is a 2 and 2 with the 2 DLI and a 2 traditional track. And this kind of fits in with that original philosophy that we had as part of the early master planning of being able to build where growth is occurring and providing additional capacity at Little Brook, bringing that up to a 4-section per grade, adding some much needed space there. So now where we stand today is we have the CP4 LB4 blend, looking at 2 4-section per grade schools. And before I kind of get off and running on section per grade, what it really simply means is that each building will be typically planned and programmed around having 4 classrooms at each grade level within the building. And for the dual track, you would have an even split between the DLI as well as the traditional track. And I think this fits a little bit better with those planning parameters, especially with looking at having that expansion and space needed where growth is occurring. I will say that this is the recommended path forward. We do know that part of any design and planning process, the details will change as you get a little bit more focused, as you work down through it. You have discussions, there'll be nuances that are changing, but the recommended path will not change as part of this. And this has been a joint recommendation for both the administration and the committee. And I'll just touch on the very, very high level of this. So as part of this, there'll be, and Dan will be able to get into a lot more detail. There'll be new and updated classroom spaces at both elementary schools as well as the middle school. Community Park in Little Brook, as I mentioned, will support 4 sections per grade. They will also be able to support that dual track. And then in the future, reserving the opportunity of being able to add space to Johnson Park as well as Riverside, should it be needed. So as part of this process, it's just this continual planning process. As we look ahead now, we look at the next 5 years, understanding where those most critical space needs are now, but also continuing to be able to sort of track and advance other planning as you start to see space needs. So this isn't really one plan that's going to reshape and address all of the areas of education in Princeton for the next 100 years. It's really looking at a smaller window there and really being targeted of addressing that space at the elementary and middle school. There's a lot of advantages to this. It does create parity, especially across the schools, as we do not want to have one overly large school. That's something that we heard, versus smaller schools. So you have a Little Brook and CP that will be of similar size, not the exact size. They're not being mirrored of each other or built at the exact time, but of similar size with similar operational capacities. We will now have the ability to align the capacity with the enrollment. That's going to occur through a redistricting process. And I think one of the key things, and I know we had a lot of questions on it, is that you never want to have the redistricting before you go through a referendum based on a plan itself, because you don't know if that plan is going to be approved, and you do not want to go through a redistricting process, especially when there is a major construction program that's going to be out a number of years. You want to be able to time that up appropriately. So that's something that's going to be happening down the road. And you also want to be able to begin having those deeper discussions on, should in the interim you need to be able to free up some space, you want to ensure that that's in alignment with that longer term vision of what those attendance boundaries and that policy is going to look like for placement of students, to ensure that students and families aren't impacted more than once as part of this process. So as I mentioned, the planning process is continuous. The recommended approach is really that next 5 to 7 years. The referendum is targeted for September of 2024. Dan will talk a little bit deeper on getting a package into the Department of Education. But ultimately, I think this gets Princeton on the right path of being able to address the needs that we could see, as well as continually assessing the needs from a capacity, educational standpoint, a facility condition standpoint, to ensure that they're continually meeting the needs of the community. Education doesn't stay static. Education that was 1980s is much different than education in early 2000 and much different in 2020 and beyond. This is just a big picture timeline of really looking at where we're at in this orange block. We completed all of the green block to date. We're working towards getting a package in for the Department of Education. The board has to go through a number of actions, but ultimately in the springtime, being able to submit to the DOE, and then looking ahead a little bit, a fall referendum, which has a pretty well prescribed package of resolutions and process that needs to be followed in order to be able to get that in place. And then should the referendum be successful, it'll go into design for the projects included in that referendum, but also being able to take some of those next steps towards implementation, especially as we talk about redistricting. Those conversations will be happening in the next several years, probably starting around the fall of 2025, where you begin looking at enrollment, looking at the current trends, looking at the space that's going to be there, ultimately adopting a plan, getting a plan in place for the fall of 2026, so that as CP and Little Brook construction is completed, you have those boundaries in place you can go through that mobilization plan, and everything's in place on track for that 27-28 school year. With that, I'll pass the sharing baton over to Dan, if you want to walk us through the architecture, Dan.
Sure, I will share the screen here.
Thank you.
We'll take questions after this next part of the presentation from the audience, and I'll open up the chat at that point too. So if people feel more comfortable, they can put some questions in there, and we'll try to get to those as well.
Okay, is everybody seeing this screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to expand on what Mike Zuba, the planner, was talking about, and just so everybody knows that the collaboration process, and this is kind of the outline of the process that we're going to go through in this slide presentation here. We're going to go over all the potential projects and we'll overview, and then we'll go into each individual school. The process to develop to this point was very collaborative. We worked with Mike Zuba's team. We worked with the district administration as well as the actual administration and teachers at each school. So we walked through, we met with the principals, we met with some of the administration, and walked through these schools and spaces to, one, make sure that what we're providing and what we're looking at as a solution collectively is going to meet the needs and make it flexible for the future and carry you into the future. So that's part of it. It's a collaborative process, making sure that the needs of each school are met. Once we go through those and at each school, we'll talk about the cost ranges. At this point, we are in the cost range. We're pretty close when you can see the cost range, but it is a range. And I'll do a summary of the schedule with the DOE process in there that Mike was alluding to. And then, as Matt said, we'll take some questions. So as you can see here, the additions that we're proposing at the middle school, at Community Park in Little Brook, and some of the renovations and then the improvements at the high school. The additions and renovations are based off of where we're going to see the impact and the increase of students coming into the district. Again, making it for those two, dual track where we have 2 and 2 of traditional versus NDLI. So that's what we're taking into account. When we're doing these additions and these schematics, and I'll run through them, we're looking to make sure that there's a parity between the schools, that we have the same size classes. We want to make sure we're addressing the types of program needs and spaces at the same sizes to give the adequate program and education across the schools. So I'll start with the middle school, and I'll show you a site plan first and some of the needs that are addressed. Here's Walnut at the bottom of my screen, left to right. And what you can see in the front of the school is we have what we call these pods. We have 1, 2, and 3 squares on the outside here, existing pods, we're calling them. We're proposing a 2-story addition in the front of the school. And we're talking about a connecting corridor back to a pod. And we are looking at ways to improve this with an entrance, but I'll show you the layout for the classroom here. And in the back in here is the existing cafeteria. We're looking at some ways to address expansion for much needed cafeteria and serving line, along with a much needed gym, multi-purpose / auxiliary gym space. And what you're looking at the site plan here is taking up some parking that is able to be given up for that addition. Again, trash enclosure back here. You can see we're very sensitive to playing fields, drainage, and the actual appurtenances that are going on the site. You'll see actually to the one side here, this is actually an existing drainage structure, which is why we're locating the additions in blue where we are. So this is an overview of both floor plans. We have the first floor plan on my left, and then on the right here, we have a second floor plan of the addition that we're showing. And what you can see here in yellow are corridors and circulation. And I'll start with the front of the building here. We have a pod that we're adding on to with almost another similar pod. We have 3 classrooms on the bottom floor. Again, a connecting corridor link. This bottom here is about 4,000 square feet. This is the actual district IT and tech department. The idea is that this would be relocated from the high school into a better suited location at the middle school, and it would free up about the 4,000 square feet in the high school for renovations, for enhancements at that school as well. And what this does is this entrance over here to Walnut would be a covered walkway carrying you into the building and then into your existing secure vestibule. On the back of the building, again, so here's when you walk into the building, you go through, here is your cafeteria. We would be looking to have a connecting corridor into an addition with faculty dining here. We would look for serving line improvements to deal with some of the backup that happens right now as you're laid out to help with that. We're looking at expanding that cafeteria. And the idea of this expansion into this room is that the rooms are connected and it gives you a much needed multi-purpose auxiliary gym space. And the important thing to note here is that this can be accessed at night from this parking lot if you want to close down the rest of the school, but come into a lobby here with toilet rooms, mechanical, and access a space if you needed to use it for the community or school at night. Across from that, on the existing part, this is actually within an existing footprint. This is a renovation. And I'll get into the difference later between addition and renovation in terms of the DOE process. But there's a bunch of rooms here, and I say a bunch of rooms, meaning there's smaller rooms right now that aren't serving the bigger need of having adequate class sizes for music. So we would be taking those rooms, adding a little corridor here in these smaller, making these rooms much more suitable in size for middle school music program and storage and so on. So in the front of the building, I'll go on the second floor here. You can see the other classroom addition and the connection. What happens in the classroom, I'll just move my screen here. We have a science lab upstairs that you can see. One of the needs as we were walking through was to offer the right amount of curriculum, was an additional science lab was needed. So that's that bigger space here you see is that. And then again, classrooms along with toilet rooms, circulation, vertical circulation, and corridors. So again, those are needs identified at the school. You can see the color coding here for the spaces that we offered. Much like that at the community park school, some other things that we were based on a walkthrough and identifying with the district administration is the need for classroom additions, as well as addressing some of the existing spaces by adding on additional space to improve the other spaces that are in the building. And I'll get into that with the floor plan. But you can see a site layout. We have potential parking lot renovations in the corner here. Front entrance coming into the school this way. You have your classroom wing back here right now. We're proposing a 6-room addition on the back of the school. This would be a secure courtyard, meaning we would fence it off, but it would be a courtyard. We're going to look to connect the addition with a covered walkway to get across. So now in this school, having circulation instead of going in this U shape, make it circular so you can connect across. We have a multi-purpose room, gymnasium addition, and over here, actually, we'll look at a media center expansion. And what this site layout does and this building addition does is free up some space in the existing for other improvements that we need, especially with the cafeteria to handle increased enrollments. You can see that we have new playgrounds that we're taking into consideration in paved areas from the site we're taking up. And there's an existing playground over here that would virtually remain as is and almost out of the way. We working in such a way that construction could take place around this and access, but that existing playground, we are sensitive to that area of the site. So again, here's the layout now coming in. You can see the front entrance to the school coming in where my mouse is on the bottom. Coming across to the left side of the building, in the bottom corner here, you see a classroom and a small group room. What this is actually your existing media center, which is on the smaller side right now. So what we're looking to do is by adding on to this addition, we're actually taking the media center and putting it into this magenta color here, expanding it, giving some nice natural daylight and putting some much needed space, taking over the old media center and offering these small group rooms, which offer student services for a multitude of what would be needed for individualized instruction or smaller groups. On the back of the school here, you could see we have 3 classrooms and again, some utility or storage or toilet room in the orange. Coming across this way onto the right, you can see there's a hallway, a covered walkway into that secure courtyard, and we'd be connecting into a yellow corridor here. What we're showing is a needed multi-purpose room with stage. The reason this multi-purpose room and everything is needed with the stage is that you have an existing gym, which is a little under let's say typical size. And you have a kitchen and cafeteria that if we remove the stage in the existing cafeteria, we can locate it in our addition. This frees up within the footprint of this existing cafeteria here, more seating needed for the increase during lunch service. And that also allows us to improve the service line for food service during lunch. The existing gym, we would split it again to media center, some storage space in between, offer as a buffer to offer a bigger music room, about a 1,400 square foot music room. Again, that'll bring it into the size of what we're looking for other schools to be and what we need for music. We're very sensitive to the sound in the media center, again, separating it with another room in between with that storage the stage and multi-purpose room addition in the middle. Again, circulation is now connected into the building, alleviating that with some of the increase. On the second floor of this classroom addition to the left, you can see with the green, we have 3 classrooms above, just like on the first floor. And right here above these 2 kindergarten classrooms on the first floor would be small group rooms on the second floor. And we would make that connection into the second floor at a later date. Things to note, this is obviously, you could see a lot of shuffling and a lot of addition going on here. We are sensitive to concerns with the district as far as amount of disruption and time frame it takes for this to be done for a school. And there are ways to phase this and work it where we would plan on doing additions and making swing space, so we're sensitive to those disruptions, because the goal is to offer the highest level of education we can at all times to go through and make sure. So this is Community Park. I'll take you over to Littlebrook. Again, site plan here, you can see a potential parking lot expansion in the back of the site. Again, with the areas that we're looking at, in addition, we are sensitive to new playground with shade that we're showing in the back of the building. And what you can see in the blue here is a small, again, music room addition in this area. And then we have a 6 classroom addition as identified as a need in this area. And I'll show you the renovations of the existing on the floor plan here. So right now, a gymnasium in the back here, vocal music room we would be adding on. There's an undersized music room here that we need for much needed storage for the gym. There's a lot of lacking storage in this area of the building, let's say. So we're giving that back to storage, adding on a vocal music room. You can see 6 classrooms added to the space in the back as an addition with some toilet rooms. Again, keeping access to these classrooms, again, open, sensitive to that. What you do see here is some renovation space in the existing footprint. Currently, right now, these are student service offices where you have services with the administration, whether child study team or interventions and things like that are in the school, that you have classrooms or offices embedded within each other. We'd like to have those spaces accessed individually, private, so you can have your student services all with the proper square footage and off the hallway here for privacy and needs. And then coming around, similarly, you see another small group instruction rooms. You have 2 very, very large kindergarten rooms, which are significantly larger than what you would need for new DOE standards. We would make sure that the existing kindergarten room is brought down to that current standard, and then we would offer some small group instruction. Again, this is a theme throughout these additions that you see here. It's a meeting with the principals and meeting with the administrations, the needs for breakout spaces and educators to pull out those students from classrooms and homerooms into their smaller instructional spaces. Important thing to note on this whole project and this whole approach is that the idea of these rooms is to be flexible. That'll carry you beyond that 5 to 7 year period that Mike Zuba was mentioning about in the planning process. So what is all this going to cost? That's always the question, right? I've showed you a lot of diagrams and a lot of construction. Here are the cost ranges that we're looking at for the middle school. You can see that it is a range, but we are within close numbers here. And what this totals out to is 81 million to 85 million. What I will note is at the high school where we're and Valley Road, what we didn't show you as far as layouts, but there are proposed HVAC renovations at the high school. There's a central plant and chiller plant that's there that needs some renovations. And the Valley Road, if Matt wants to speak to it as well, but I know that you have the building on the corner there that's the unoccupied part, let's say, and we know that we're taking into account removing that, and there's some community impacts and conversations that'll go on that end of it, but we are cognizant of that, and that's planned as part of this this process that we're taking on right now. I'll say right now is just to hit some of these notes. Their preliminary costs, again, they're on a range. These projects, and I'll show it on the schedule, are projected out to go into 25, 6, and 7, meaning that these costs are high. We hope they're conservative now. It is a range because we have to incur these costs at a later time. So we're hoping that these are the numbers that we're estimating high now. We're going to refine them a little closer, obviously, as we get closer to a Department of Education submission. Every submission requires specific cost estimates. We're aware of that. As the scope gets refined, we'll refine that cost. The state is expected to contribute some portion of the eligible projects. And what I mean by that is a renovation is subject to eligibility within a renovation or existing footprint. We call it 40%. That's prorated to, I believe, 34% to ish. So what happens there is that's a renovation. The state will fund 40% of that project roughly. The additions, the funding mechanism is slightly different. It's 40% of the eligible cost, meaning our eligible costs are based on unhoused students. We would work with Mike Zuba's numbers and his report and DOE to make sure that everyone's in agreement with those numbers. And based on the unhoused students, that would be your eligible cost, that your eligible construction. Additions tend to be far less, so I'm going to say around 10 to 11% that comes out to versus the 40, and that's a rough estimate. We'll share those details. The important thing is that we need to get this process in, and I'll go through the schedule on what this means as far as cost. Right now, July of 2024 this year, that would be when you would approve your referendum and work. We have work to do beforehand to submit. You have to submit 6 months ahead of time of a referendum with all of your project applications. In that time frame around June into July, we would hope to get what we call our preliminary eligible cost letters, which tell us what our funding and our eligible projects are. So we would know at that point what DOE is contributing or the state is contributing to the projects. We would look for a fall referendum. We would have some period of design, a 6 to 10 month period of design in there. The construction of additions, you can see we're planning somewhere in 2025 all the way out through May of 2027. Again, we're very sensitive to, you can see there's 2 phases of construction looking to be at the end of 2027 complete. I realize that the numbers that we're seeing now, we're well into that 5-year time frame with experiencing those numbers. They are estimates. The idea is to be flexible. And what happens at that point is the phasing and, let's say, sensitivity to disruption in the district. We have to take that into account. I can't stress that enough. That's why we're looking at a phased approach. And again, you can see some of the notes, the DOE process that I just described, and then passage of a fall referendum.
Hey, Dan,
So-
I just want to comment real quick on the
Yeah, go ahead.
July date is, I don't think that's correct. We want to be approving earlier in order to get out in the fall or late fall.
Yeah, so that July date, what that means there, that's a good clarification, Matt. So on the bottom there, the actual approval required to the DOE to move forward. What that means is we have the board will approve us to submit to DOE very much sooner. The
Okay.
actual approval, that what that really means is acceptance of your final eligible cost letters at that point. So in July, 60 days ahead of the referendum, you want to be ready with your referendum question and your and finalize those selections of the from your preliminary eligible cost letter, your FEC or PEC, to your FEC letter, your finals. So that's what that July really means.
Okay. So, okay, thank you.
It's a 60-day in advance number of a September date would be that.
Got it. All right, thank you.
So any, questions, however you want, if you have anything you'd like to add, Matt.
I think we open it up first to board members. Any comments, questions, clarifications? Go ahead, Susan.
What? Oh, I raised my hand on what I used to think, but can you just speak, Matt, Princeton just put out a new master plan, which, shows some advanced future growth. And I know you're looking a little at the demographics, and you and Mike, can you speak a little to that and what's contemplated by the work that's being done in this referendum?
This referendum, the one we're talking about tonight, not the one that was just passed. Yeah.
Future one, because I know you had a list of things that the town had given you that was approved, that we know of, and obviously there's things in the master plan. There's a 4th round, plus there's other potential zoning differences that the new master plan would have.
Correct. Mike Zuba and myself are working with town planner to fine tune and update the approved housing projects. Some of the projects that have been more recently approved, some changes. So we've been in touch over the last week to try to get that updated information. So we'll be working that in to make sure we have the latest information in our projection.
Yeah, and Matt, if I can add, Susan, we met with the town planner right before the end of the year, going over the master plan and looking at the horizon for some of that, and realizing that those actions will have to go through ordinances, and there'll be some public process, and there'll be some work there before they're put in place. But also, as Matt mentioned, fine tuning, so getting into the bedroom splits, counts, where construction is. We want to be as precise as we can be on that information, but also going through the process with New Jersey DOE. We have really kind of like a 5-year lens that we're looking at for what we're going to be providing enrollment for this project that's getting submitted, and that will impact our basically the state aid for the project, but also from our own master planning lens, we do want to know what additional projects are out there so we can really kind of have a number and understand what's coming down the pipeline, even outside of the projects we're talking about in this upcoming referendum. So that demographic update is going to serve several purposes. And that information is going to be helpful for this planning as well as the much longer term planning.
Thank you. Obviously, it's a projection, and what you've taught us is the further we get from today's date, the less accurate it is. But I'm glad that you guys are taking a relook just to make sure as we go into this referendum that we think, we're in good shape.
Thank you. Debbie, you had a question or comment?
Yes, so parking, I heard for CP and Littlebrook. I don't know how much it is per school. I'm not asking for you to tell me that right now, but I'm wondering if we can look more at parking on the streets, keep the price down. Littlebrook has a lot of streets. It's none of the ones that are over near the high school that everybody complains about. I'm just going to put that out there, anything to keep costs down, but really curious why we're building parking lots, which take away trees and grass and all that. And especially near CP, they have that huge parking lot that goes along where the tennis courts are and all. I don't even know what it's called, but you know that one. So I will put my plug in that I really don't know why we're building parking lots. The other thing I just wanted to ask, because I know we're doing some renovations to some of the kitchens, is there any money still in that food fund, which I know really probably isn't that big because COVID kind of changed the way we were doing a lot of food. So just wanted to bring that up to look at that too.
Yeah, we do have some. Thank you, Debbie. Parking is constrained at most of the elementary schools, really all our schools, except for middle school currently. So adding on to the buildings would increase that. You are right, that back parking lot on the CP South, which is being redeveloped actually. But that's a little bit of a walk from the school. So it's definitely.
Well, we really should talk about what a walk is. I mean, do we need, do we need to buy people umbrellas? I guess for me, if I see the cost, then it'll help me. But,
Yeah.
what's a walk? I guess we have to qualify what all these are. And I'm not picking on you. I just get really frustrated with parking.
Yeah, parking is a hot topic, hot button issue. So we're definitely going to.
It is. And I don't know. I don't want to ask taxpayers for money for that. That's just where I feel. But all right. Thank you.
Thank you. There was another question so anyone raise your hand in the audience and we can call on you if there's any other board members that wanted to comment or have questions. There was another question in the chat. The operations at the middle school will be how operations at middle school will be maintained during construction? I'm thinking student experience will be connected. So I think at all the schools, the middle school may be the idea is to build the additions while school is going on with as little interference as possible. There, of course, will be some. Middle school may be a little smoother than the elementaries. CP may have a little bit more disruption, but it's very. When we did the high school edition, it kind of happens while school is going on, and we hope to have as little interference as possible with everyday activities. New space at middle school line projected enrollment growth at that's the plan, is to add what we're currently forecasting a peak of 917 students at the middle school. So we would have a little excess space there to be able to meet that need. Let's see, I'll take a live question. Brenda Frazier.
Yeah, hi. Sorry. Thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to follow up on Debbie's point, which is well made, that we don't like to cover green things with pavement. But at Littlebrook, there is not currently enough parking for the current staff, and they're already having to go out onto the street. And I feel like we got to have a place for them to park. And so I realize that nobody wants to spend money on that, but as long as we're using cars, we got to have a place to put them. Thanks.
Understood. Thanks for your comment.
Can I just ask a question? So a few years ago, we reconfigured the parking lot at the middle school across from Anguyo. I'm just wondering if there's any benefit. There seems to be a lot of blacktop there already, and maybe it could be, maybe we could look at it to see if it could be more efficient.
It's empty a lot. They're not all used, the Goya
No,
ones.
no, but I'm saying, could we do something similar at Little Brook?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yep.
Matt, do you want to speak to that question in the chat about the differential price between the CP5 and the 4.4?
Yeah, basically, CP is having a little bit more added on to it, and additionally, the core spaces there are slightly smaller. We've been actively comparing both CP and Little Brook and their core space to try to balance that out as accurately as possible. So that's
I think-
why.
Yeah, I think the question is about, maybe somebody wants to understand the difference between the original proposal that we had of doing everything at CP versus now doing it at 2 schools. Is there a price differential there?
Oh yeah, I'd put that in the chat. We're trying to quantify that, but it basically is site mobilization. So there's slight additional mobilization at each site that's being constructed, trailer. We don't think it would add construction management costs being at 2 sites because they would be able to split that time. The additionally, site work at 2 sites would be slightly more than site work at just 1 site. So that's what has a slight incremental addition in cost when you look at making a larger single school improvement or improving or adding on to CP and Little Brook. But the benefit, I think, outweighs the cost. And we're going to try to put a number on, it's really just an estimate anyway, but we're going to be, the architects are helping us to try to put an estimate on that. But the benefit is then you have 2 schools that look more like each other as opposed to 1 school that is about 60 to 65% higher in capacity than the other 3, which is not, would not be great. There is another question in person, then we'll jump back to the chat questions. Zach?
Hi, thanks, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to on the differential in price, sort of, and I apologize because I did ask you this.
We're losing you, Zach. Go ahead.
Did he ask the question between a 5-6 school and a?
I'll step back because the only thing I've heard to date really is that it's too expensive. And back in October, that meant it was going to cost roughly double the cost of the CP5 plan, which was preferred at the time, 110 million versus 53 million. But now we're looking at CP4, LB4, PMS, which is going to projected to cost 85 million. So that's shrinking the difference by half already. And then talking about operational costs, I'm wondering, won't more students, no matter where they are, require similar numbers of teachers, support staff, utilities, aside from a new principal? And I guess I'm pushing back because the 5.6 to me still sounds like the most elegant option with minimal, if any, construction disruption and reducing population of all the schools in the middle school simultaneously. So I'm wondering if you can explain a little more why the 5.6 is not an option as the price of the preferred plans creep up. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been working on your answer. Actually, Brian McDonald forwarded to me. We're trying to come up with some frequently asked questions, and yours is a question that a lot of people's mind. The 5-6 school here on this site would be very expensive. So I was looking at your cost range, but you'd have to back out so if you back out the HVAC and the tech related and the Valley Road demolition, you'd be approximately comparing the 110 to 68 million, which is about 61% higher. So it is significantly higher. There are certain advantages to a 5.6. It was very appealing to our educators, the educational administration and educators in some ways. We are constrained here on this site. We need our fields, so it leaves about 4 acres to build on. It would have to be likely 3 stories with parking underneath. Dan could probably talk a little bit more in depth on that than I can, would have more knowledge, but it makes it for tough construction. And then we'd have to have a place for our administration, our buses. So it would be an interesting building. I think in the end it could be cool, but it would be very expensive. So in the operational cost question, Zach, it definitely is incremental additional operating costs by adding a new building. We have an administrator, building monitor, and we would have likely another administrative assistant. It would add space for custodians, likely 1 to 2 more custodians versus the other models. But you are correct in some ways, certainly in your thinking, in that, you know, increasing enrollment is going to increase teaching staff. So very good question. And it's been asked a couple times throughout these presentations that we've been doing. Did that help, Zach? I know you have a little one in the background, I heard.
Yeah, a couple. Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Thank you. There's
Matt, just real quick, I saw a comment that I do want to make sure that there is going to be renovations to the multi-purpose APR room and serving line at Littlebrook. I did skip over that, but we have a little area, just in case anybody asked the question. It's planned on expanding some seating and serving line items in the cafeteria at Littlebrook, if anybody asks.
And there's a question about drop off and pickup. There hasn't been a study done on what the impact it would have. The projected student growth at Littlebrook and CP maps onto these. Can you talk about how the projected student growth at Littlebrook and CP maps onto these changes? For example, will 6 classrooms at Littlebrook be enough? Mike could probably speak really well to that. It's in concert with this, he was talking about will be as we move forward in a couple of years, redistricting. But Mike, you want to give a couple comments on that?
That's a good question. Happy to do so. So part of the process that we went through is we've mapped out students by address over the, I think we have about 6 or 7 years of data in order to be able to sort of track trends across the neighborhoods of Princeton Public School students, as well as tracking housing and student generation from that. When we were developing options, I was just putting together some conceptual boundaries, not redistricting boundaries per se, but just ideas of how we could be able to map students across from one school to the next with having as little impact as possible, to be able to go through that, to ensure that the building proposals from a new capacity and addition standpoint are going to match up with what the enrollment is in a likely catchment area as we make those adjustments some point in time in the future. So we want to ensure that, we mentioned having as minimal impact as possible, but also having a very cost-conscious approach to the taxpayer to not overbuild. So it was a little bit of push and pull as we worked our way through the amount of space that we're going to need and adjusted boundaries, and looked at the elementary schools as a whole, the total capacity, to ensure that we had sufficient headroom across all the buildings. Everybody would have sufficient space to have flex classrooms. So when that redistricting process gets launched, when we're further along and hopefully successfully approve a referendum, that we can be able to not only address Littlebrook, address CP, but also have it where we have equal, not free space, but flex space across all the schools, so that there's headroom across all the schools, not just in the 2 schools that are getting the space.
Thank you, Mike.
No
Mar,
problem.
did you want to comment, or did you have a question?
Yeah, I did, Mike. I just wanted to be, for my own clarification, actually, just to be clear, the numbers that you're looking at do not yet include perceived changes from the master plan. They're what is in the books right now. Is that correct? Or have you guys already incorporated any of future growth that might result from the master plan?
What we're doing is we're incorporating growth that's imminent, so growth that's either under construction or in the COA right now. And the feedback we've been receiving on other similar projects from the DOE is that we can't include things that aren't imminent. And if we do, we could do it for our own planning purposes. But when we submit it, we can only include projects that are imminent and within a certain time frame in order to be able to get reimbursement for those students that are going to be generated from there. So we're being mindful of it more of what's likely going to occur for the big picture, but also for the project, we're going to have to be able to provide enrollment that's going to be supported by the on-the-ground development that's imminent. Dan,
And I'm sorry, but how many years out is that, Mike?
5 years.
5 years. So
Yeah.
so we're presenting to the BOE the next 5 years growth. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Dan, did I do a good job of summarizing that? I see you
Yeah.
nodding.
Yep, yes. Yeah, we were looking at 5 years. That's the maximum that DOE at this point in time projects, right? We don't go beyond the 5
Yeah.
years. They have their projection numbers and we have Mike's numbers as well. They're somewhat in alignment. And what happens is we go back and forth, making sure that, like Mike said, that the logic is sound and that we're planning for imminent projects that are being built that we know we can accommodate. We're not just going to build on something that we can't prove, that we have to be able to prove those numbers.
But I would say from the long-term planning process, outside of the DOE process, we need to be mindful of that. We need to be very mindful of that, and we need to be able to understand where some of those potential changes proposed in the master plan could land under our current and future boundaries of where that may impact enrollment. So I think it's just honestly a constant process of being able to communicate back and forth, being able to understand land use has an impact on enrollment and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Beth, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've talked about over the last, months and years is that we want to make sure we're building just, the right amount at the right time, and we're keeping flexibility for future boards so they can accommodate. And we all learned during the pandemic, coming on this board in 2018, we had a very different sense of growth, right? And then things changed in ways no one could have imagined. And now we're less than we were before the pandemic, but we're gradually ramping up again. And we know that they're building different types of housing in Princeton than they did in the past, where the rents are really expensive. So Matt, you were saying some of these new developments aren't filling as fast as we might have thought they would. So we just need to be very cautious. And we know that the public, the community really cares about this. In particular, when you get to people who don't have kids in the school, they want to make sure that we're kind of hitting the sweet spot where we're planning for what we need, not too much. But the idea of moving to 2 schools from the CP5, actually, one of the attractive pieces of that was, again, we're building where the growth is, and we're allowing future boards the opportunity to rebalance in the future by, say, adding some rooms at Riverside or doing something at Johnson Park, so that we would then have and continue to have 4 elementary schools that might be relatively comparable in size. So we're trying to hit that. And I think, Mike, what you've said to us about the master plan as well is that, it's going to take years for that to kind of flow through. And we will be able to see, and future boards will have more data in 3 or 4 years to understand, again, where things are going, where the trends are going. So I know when I first came on the board, I was all about let's plan for 15 to 20 years. And then I learned over the time that that's really not how it works with school boards. And we just don't have the data to do that. So I think we're trying to hit the sweet spot.
Thank you. Brenda, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. Thanks for taking it again, Matt. This is maybe more for Dr. Tu, but I just wanted to make sure that there's been thought to how we handle the added number of classes at Little Brook to the specials teachers, if there are 3 more grade level classrooms or 4 more grade level classrooms, I'm not sure it's feasible within the schedule for the same music teacher to teach all those classes or the same art teacher to teach all those classes. And I'm sure somebody's thought about it, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
Thank you for bringing that up. It does impact, we always have to think about how changes impact instruction. Right now, believe it or not, JP has more class sections than Littlebrook, and they'd sort of be at a comparison. Earlier, Dan mentioned parity amongst the schools. Right now with the current schedule, yes, it would work to provide that level of support and have that consistent amount of specials minutes across. We also, as an elementary team with the principals, our special education supervisor, our elementary supervisor, and some of our K-12 department supervisors are working on building a consistent elementary schedule, even though we have unique programming in each of our buildings, so that we're guaranteeing the same amount of minutes in every subject area, so that no matter where you are and what building you're in, you're all going hopefully to the same middle school, and we want that level of consistency. So thank you for thinking about that.
Thanks.
Thank you. There was a question in the chat about Littlebrook. The cafeteria is being renovated. And the APR itself is actually quite large as compared specifically to CP. So while that won't be expanded, there may be some minor upgrades, but generally speaking, it's very large as compared to CP. And I think the other question is also touching on functional capacity of our schools as we learn through this planning process. It's how we use our schools. We're at a pretty low class size right now. K-5, we're just over 18 students, and that's just including regular sections, of course, not self-contained sections or pre-K, which are smaller. So it's, Beth, did you have another question?
I just wanted to go back to, since we have Mike today and we didn't have him on Saturday, and a question had come up on Saturday about redistricting. And I think the parent kind of had thought that, if we do a referendum and we pass these projects, then we redistrict. And if it doesn't pass, then somehow we wouldn't redistrict. And I think it's important for people to understand that we know that there's growth coming, and with the projections we have, there's going to be redistricting no matter what. Like we have to figure out how to better utilize our 4 elementaries. And so the projected projects and the solutions that are being, I think, presented by the administration would require redistricting, but it's going to happen in either way, but it's actually a more, I think, elegant way of doing it, because you think it's about 20, you've said to us maybe 25% impact. And if the referendum would not pass and we would have no solution, eventually we'll have to do something that we don't even know what. We don't even know how we'd have to deal with that, but it would definitely involve redistricting either way.
Yeah, great point, Beth. I could just add to that. I think, and you're 100% right. That's why right now the nature of the redistricting will change based on the outcome of the referendum. You said it best, in that it's inevitable. I think with the referendum passing and the additions of the space, the redistricting will occur, and it will occur in a manner that you're going to have equal headroom across the schools. If the referendum doesn't pass, and when we run the numbers and we look at the amount of instructional classroom space that we have, it's basically going to be shifting students to wherever there's available space in the foreseeable future, and then shifting students to wherever there's available space in the next foreseeable future, and a movement of students. And there will likely be a movement as well as housing developments continue to come online. So, but it's not going to, without a referendum, it's not going to create headroom, and it's not going to create the capacity that's needed. You would just be looking at utilizing each school building at their, close to their maximum capacity, and being able to move students in order to be able to leverage wherever you have some capacity in a given smaller window of time. So in the longer term, there would be a greater number of disruptions should it not pass, versus having more, as you put it, more elegant one-time redistricting plan that then has a life cycle of its own until the next board reevaluates, reassesses, and sees if there's a need to do construction to address any of the student enrollment and any of the capacity within the buildings.
We'd be we're approaching full capacity. So if we don't have a plan in place and this doesn't pass, we would have larger class sizes. We would have to consider how programs are affected. There are significant impacts to us for status quo. It's why we're not going with the status quo. So I just think we just need to keep reminding people of that. That's all.
Yeah, there's definitely impacts to the resources and support spaces within the buildings themselves.
And keeping class sizes low is probably one of the greatest overriding principles that that our planning is focusing on, and that was voiced as almost, almost 4 years ago now, right? January of 2020.
Mhm.
The community, that was probably the single biggest comment when we did that community-wide event at the high school with our same planners ran that event, was low class size, small class size, small class size, small class size, and our educators and administration backed that. So, Susan, did you want to add something?
I just today it came up again, and also at the last Saturday meeting. Can you speak to the work that you're doing with the architects in terms of our outside play spaces to make sure there's adequate play spaces, both with hardtop and with grass and safe spaces, because the community is definitely concerned that when you do construction, that playgrounds go away or there's not enough space for the kids, both during the construction and then obviously we want to have a great looking place after the construction.
Certainly be some impact during construction. I mean, we wouldn't want to say there won't be, because there will be. And we are, I think, in my opinion, blessed with some pretty nice footprints at the four elementary schools. So we are, the 2023 referendum that was passed on November 7th contemplated some work being done at them to some drainage work, which is certainly at CP will be impacted potentially by these plans. So we're having to look at that. We also are looking at some drainage issues at Littlebrook in the kindergarten playground. And then now at Johnson Park, there are a few drainage issues that come to light. So we're definitely at the forefront is improving our play areas for the kids.
Yeah, I can tell you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was
so
gonna say, at the community park specifically, there are play areas that we're taking in addition to playground with the additions. We're very cognizant to give not just the playground and the play area, both of them back. It's also an opportunity to address accessibility with materials, like you were saying, with a playground that's moving or a play area. We have the ability to a mix of hardscape, rubber surface, for instance, or grass areas, and we can make those accessible areas and age appropriate equipment as well in areas where we have pre-K, K, and those kinds of expansions. So specifically at the schools that I went through with Community Park in Littlebrook, we're very cognizant of the areas we're touching, making sure we give also play area and playground both back in different types of materials, with bringing them up to accessibility.
Thanks, Dan.
Mhm.
There's a good question in the chat that we've been actually working on. George Duthie,
Yep.
Dan, and the team are working on that particular. The question is, the addition of in front of PMS going to be connected in a secure fashion on more than one side. And it came about Saturday, and we've all been thinking about it. George has been thinking about it, and Dan have been thinking about it all along, because it would be ideal to have a loop. And in addition to the planned covered walkway, which has to be covered and not its own building because of fire code, but to have that will help too. But this will
Yes.
really have. So they're working right now. And
Yeah,
go ahead.
we have a layout, Matt, that looks, we're looking at layout, we're taking into consideration, and that's a good question because it talks about the circulation and that it's already a maze. We're looking at improving that to make it simpler. It is a little bigger, obviously, when you look at that, but it does address things like front entrance of the building, the circulation, and then the two connections back and forth and what you're taking up. So we're just doing our due diligence on our side, making sure it's feasible from a code standpoint, and then feasibility of the actual footprint. But it's a very good question. We actually started the layouts already. So when we get to a point that we're comfortable, we'll make sure everybody sees it.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any more questions. Oh, there's a question. Go ahead, Beth.
Great. I mean, if we don't have more questions, I wanted to just say, could we talk just briefly, what should people expect next? What are next, immediate next steps?
So our architects are working on fine tuning the plans, such as the refinement of looping around to the front, as well as some other key inputs. Our planners are working and at the same time, in January 30th, we'll be approving the amendment of the long-range facility plan, which simply, so everything that we do on a capital basis, actually, whether it's referendum or capital service, has to be in the long-range facility plan. So we'll be authorizing the amendment to that, which would occur. It did occur in past referendums and would need to occur in this referendum. Did you want to talk real briefly about what that is,
Yeah,
Dan.
we also have another question in the chat. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, if you want to look at the question, I'll talk to the process if you want to look at the question first.
Was the one I just talked about, right? Yeah, the addition in the front of the middle school.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay, okay, so
No, it was a great question because it came up on Saturday, and like I said, we've been the team has been thinking about that. So the long range. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so immediate next steps for getting this moving is first long range facilities plan, like Matt said. Regardless of capital or referenda, every 5 years it's required to be updated by the state. So for a referendum or capital that are changes to that plan or additions or anything that shifts. So that's the first step in this month of January. We would be doing that. The next step after that is we're building consensus and making sure that these are the projects that we want to submit to DOE. The district would authorize us to, the architects on behalf of the district to submit project applications. That doesn't approve the projects to go to referendum. That just allows us to submit to the state. They will generate within 90 days from that submission of the projects with a specific cost. That'll generate that preliminary eligible cost letter within 90 days. At that point, we look at the preliminary eligible costs with the district. We'll see what the funding contributions are. And then you can decide at that point to accept which projects will actually become part of your referendum. And that will lead into that July deadline of your 60 days prior to a referendum vote. That's for a September timeline. If the projects, we want to shift some projects and look at a different edition, we have other dates we can look at in 24. For instance, November and December, or other referendum. You can only go to referendum, for those who don't know, 5 different times throughout the year as DOE lays them out. So that's the immediate next step is LRFP. The district will authorize us to submit just the projects. Again, that doesn't authorize the referendum. That just allows DOE to approve the projects. So that way you can go to a referendum. The district has a chance to reject or approve those letters, depending on which projects you'd like to include. You'll have the actual financing at that point. Those will become final eligible cost letters, and that will generate into a question for your referendum and a special election if it's September.
I just asked the LRFP, is that more than like you kind of have a generic per square foot or capacity or enrollment projection rather than the specific projects?
Yes, so that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. The LRFP involves enrollments in a major amendment like we're doing. So we will put in those 5-year projected out. We have 5 years of what we call from the current year back is historical enrollments of what the last 5 years looked like. And then from this year, we have 5 years into the future of what the increase will look like over the 5 years. Those numbers, again, like Mike described, between the demographer's report and DOE's numbers, we'll work that out. Once that's part of the LRFP, all of the additions that you saw, renovations, will go into the LRFP, and that will factor into this enrollment and how many unhoused students. We call them unhoused, meaning that they have a place to go in the school, but it's extra area above and beyond what the school can handle. For those who don't know, part of that process with the LRFP is what we call facilities efficiency standards. DOE has a model of what they have a very, let's say, ideal or prototypical school. And the functional capacity, as Matt alluded to, is based on the gross square footage divided by a grossing factor. There's one grossing factor for elementary, one for middle, one for high school. You divide that, and that tells you your functional capacity. That's what your school can handle. It's different, though, than how you utilize it, which is why the enrollments play into this. So that's all considered, everything in the LRFP. It'll generate a report that'll tell us what those actual final numbers and square footages look like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're also going to be working on an FAQ document with some of these good questions. I'm going to save this chat and also questions we've been having from Saturday, and we'll post that on the website, which I showed at the beginning. I guess I could, I don't really need to show that. I think everyone knows at this point where that is. I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and Saturday as well. So it's been 2 nice community events. Thanks to the board for supporting administration, and hope everyone has a great night.